I'm gonna report my toxic boss to HR. Do you think that's a good idea? Well, to be honest, it might get you fired, so it might not always be the best thing to do. Before you go calling HR, you need to watch this. To know exactly what HR's function actually is, spoiler alert, it's not to protect you. The reason why I've only recommended to contact HR in maybe one video out of all of the toxic workplace and workplace issues videos that I've made on my channel, and what you need to make sure you have in place before you talk to HR if you decide to talk to HR. There might be a little bit of tea spilling along the way. If you are here for the tea and tactics to navigate obstacles at work and maybe to accelerate your career success, consider subscribing and turning notifications on so you don't miss a video. If you are ready for this one, tap that like button and let's jump straight into it. Oh, and real quick, I'm a career strategist, not a lawyer. I'm a big advocate for working with lawyers, which I'm gonna come back to and touch on, but I just wanna be really clear here that none of this is legal advice. It is just tactical advice, career bestie to career bestie, you know? The first reason why you might not call HR to discuss your workplace issues with them is you might not have an HR team. And really in my videos, this is one of the main reasons why I don't recommend calling HR, because if you're in a small or even a mid-sized company, you might not have an HR team. And in my discussions with a lot of you, I know that you are working in companies where you don't have an HR team. Or on the other hand, if you're in a company that does have an HR, they might be small, they might not be very empowered. I also know that some of you are working with really big companies, but you might be remote or you might be in locations where you don't have an HR person sitting on site with you. So you might not have the trusted relationship that makes them the first person that you're going to go to. And because I want my videos to be able to help as many people as possible, I keep these things in mind. And I don't want my advice to be go and talk to HR when a lot of you don't have an HR person that you can actually talk to. For example, in a toxic company that I worked for, there was no HR team. What was I going to do? Complain to my toxic boss about the fact that they were a toxic boss? And you might be in that exact same situation. And even if you do have an HR team, if the issue that you're having can be handled on your own, handle it on your own like the mature professional that you are. And obviously, if you're at some big company, you're at one of the FAANG companies or some blue chip, not having HR is not going to be a problem that you have. And the way that those HR teams is going to function very differently than an HR team would at a smaller company. Which brings me to the second point before you go and call HR, and that's that you really need to know what HR actually does. I'm super curious to hear from you. What do you think the role of HR is in your company? Drop it in the comments down below and I'm gonna explain it, but I really am curious to hear from you first. To understand HR fully, we need to look back to the origins of human resources. And when we do that, we actually find that human resources emerged as a way to stop employees from unionizing. So their original job was to do things like make sure that people were being paid an adequate wage so that they didn't unionize to demand more. Now, as human resources has evolved, and of course modern workplaces has evolved from back in the day where we were like building horses or something like that, the HR team handles some very specific things. Some of the functions that fall into the HR team nowadays include recruiting, employee records, benefits, people policies, discipline, performance reviews and appraisals, and people growth. Now, I know that all sounds like warm and fuzzy things, but there's something that's very important, and this is actually the key function of an HR team at most companies today. Human resources is there to protect the company. Just like how back in the day of yesteryear, their job was to stop people from unionizing because it wasn't in the best interest of the company, today they are still there to protect the best interest of the company. And while I don't want to completely overgeneralize, because there are amazing HR teams and HR professionals like my friend Tiffany, who I chatted with here live last week. I'll link it because you absolutely should check that out if you haven't already. For the most part, what this means is HR doesn't do one specific thing. Advocate for you. The job of HR ultimately comes down to making sure that the company doesn't get sued for something, not to make sure that your boss isn't an to you. To further compound this, I do think that a lot of HR professionals do have the best of intentions when they're choosing that as the career path. But what isn't often discussed that I really want to touch on today is the fact that the HR team has constraints. They might be disempowered by leadership, or they might be the enablers of bad behavior and toxic work environments because of the person who's leading the function. Yep, I've heard a lot of stories about toxic AF senior HR leaders. Don't worry, I have a little story time that I'll come back to on that point in just a minute. What I really want you to know from this and how HR is structured and what it actually does is knowing that you are your best advocate, and in some cases you might be your only advocate at work. And when that's the case, knowing your value and demonstrating it regularly is crucial. And this is why knowing and owning your unique awesomeness quotient, your UAQ, is so important. If you've heard me talking about it and you're like, Jennifer, I don't have time for a whole workshop, well, I just created a brand new UAQ starter kit. It's a guide. You can download it absolutely for free. I'm gonna link it in the description down below. I definitely recommend snagging a copy because I think it's really going to help you in knowing that value and being your own best advocate. And this actually brings me to the next thing to consider before calling HR. I've seen way too many instances where this consideration was skipped and it had disastrous results. You can be retaliated against for complaining to HR about workplace issues. Again, not a lawyer, not giving any legal advice here. I know that in most cases and most places, this is completely illegal. It being illegal doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. If the issue that you report is one that they decide goes against the best interest of the company, yikes. And that brings us to toxic HR story time. Now, just to preface, this absolutely should not happen. This client absolutely needed to talk to a lawyer, and this was highly problematic, but it happened. My client was being discriminated against and not being given equal opportunities on the basis of her gender at work. This was a widely known problem at the company and it just was not being addressed. And fed up with what was happening, my client decided to complain to HR. Well, you can see where this is going. The HR leader she was working with happened to be Patriarchy Patty, and Patriarchy Patty decided she was the problem. Why? Because when there is legitimately gender discrimination, the company can get sued. And it was Patriarchy Patty HR rep's job to make sure that that wasn't happening. Spoiler alert, she wasn't doing that job very well. And instead of fixing the problem, she decided that my client was the issue. It was easier for her to construct a narrative that my client was underperforming despite all of the metrics to the contrary than to fix the root of the problem. And a result of making her complaint to HR, we needed to enter crisis mode to make sure that she preserved her job until she was able to exit safely with another job offer. Or on the other hand, HR just might not care about the problem. And this is one I've witnessed firsthand. I worked at a company where the only HR representative of the company proudly proclaimed to the entire office that she had no issues with any toxic AF behavior unless someone complained about it. Cause you know, she was cool. And I can tell you exactly what I thought when I heard her proudly proclaim this in front of the entire office. I gotta get out of here. And this probably leaves you with the question, how can I tell if my HR team is going to support me or if they're going to be against me? Especially when you have a legitimate workplace issue which requires human resources intervention. The first thing that I encourage you to do is to look at ways that HR has reacted in the past. Have your colleagues launched a complaint about unfair treatment or the demands of the job when they haven't been heard by your manager? If you know of any instances where your coworkers have complained to HR, was HR helpful or were they harmful in the situation? This is going to be a great indicator for you who you're actually dealing with. If you are in a smaller setting where you also have access in general to the HR person or to the HR team, gauge the sentiments and the relationship that you have with them. When you are interacting with them, do you feel like there is a level of trust? What sentiments have they expressed about how they approach employee experience and employee retention? And those serious issues like we just mentioned. Because if you're working with my old HR rep, she made it pretty obvious that she was not going to be helpful at all. Another thing that can also be very helpful is if you do have an employee handbook, which most companies really should have. The employee handbook will often outline to you the instances in which you should be engaging your HR team for assistance or where you should potentially be looking elsewhere. And that brings me directly into the next point that it's really important for us to discuss when it comes to calling HR, and that is when you should go to HR and what you need to have on hand when you do. So there's the obvious low risk kind of administrative stuff that HR does that obviously you need to go to them with. If you have questions about a tax form or your benefits, your HR person is there to help you out. That is their job. On the other hand, if you're looking to complain at work to HR about more serious workplace issues, such as a toxic boss, toxic coworkers, a hostile working environment, or any of those illegal things, you need to have a few things ready before you do. First of all, pop on your detective hat and bring some evidence with you. A paper trail is going to be ideal. Is there emails, instant messages, screenshots, detailed notes from meetings that you've had with a toxic individual or about the toxic situation? When you're lodging a complaint about illegal things and hostile work environments, you don't want to make it a matter of opinion. You want to make it a matter of facts. And having evidence is going to help you build your case. If it helps, just pretend you're on one of those CSI shows and gather everything that you can. The second tip I have for you, especially if you see any potential risk for retaliation, is to consult a lawyer. I know that this costs money. I know that not everyone has an employment lawyer that they work with on a regular basis. But honestly, the money that you're going to spend to have a consultation to make sure that you are framed for success in the conversation and in the complaint at work, and also having someone lined up in case things go sideways, is going to give you peace of mind. And they will also be able to give you specific advice on your situation, the case law, and the laws of the land in which you live. Really, my motto here is better safe than sorry. If you don't have an employment lawyer and you're looking for one that you can trust, you can do things such as ask friends, former colleagues, or even just use internet reviews to help you find a good one. And finally, especially in those more serious situations such as a hostile work environment or where harassment and discrimination are taking place and you do fear that there might be retaliation that occurs, make sure that you have a solid plan B and either be ready to execute or already have it in flight before you make your complaint. This doesn't mean that you have to have a job offer lined up, though that would be helpful, but doing things like brushing up your LinkedIn profile, updating your resume, and activating your network are going to go a long way just in case you need it. Hopefully you won't, but again, better safe than sorry. I know I said that twice, but seriously, it's true in this instance. And on that note, I'd actually love to hear from you. Have you ever lodged a formal complaint about HR to something that was happening at work? Do you have any tips that you would add to the list? Let me know in the comments down below. In many instances, if you're dealing with a difficult boss or difficult coworkers, or just trying to navigate office politics, you're honestly better off on your own. I know those are challenging situations, but HR probably isn't even the best person to go to, because let's face it, they don't necessarily know how to navigate office politics either. Luckily for you, you have my channel, and I have a whole bunch of videos that are going to help you. And as a starting point, if you are dealing with difficult people right now and you just need to know how to cope, I want you to go and watch this video right now. I'm gonna lay out some steps to help you navigate that situation. But before you go, if this video helped you figure out if you should talk to HR, complain to HR, give it a thumbs up. It really helps my channel and it makes you my favorite career bestie. If you haven't already, consider subscribing for more of the best career success advice on the interwebs. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video, my friend. Bye for now.